Hey everybody, welcome to the Jim Masters Show, live entertainment, lifestyle, celebrity talk show series. So great to have you with us on the show, watching all around the world. On this episode, we are remembering pop music icon, the one and only Andy Gibb. Our special guest is Matthew Hild. He's a historian and an author, and he's penned a really, really cool book. There it is, Arrow Through the Heart, the biography of Andy Gibb. Joining us here in just a second, of course, Andy Gibb, as we know, was such a beloved talent, but gone way too soon. Lost him way, way too soon, too young. And we're going to talk about some of that. Of course, he was an English singer, born Andrew Roy Gibb, born in 1958 and passed in 1988. The younger brother of Barry, Robin, and Maurice Gibb, musician who formed. Those musicians formed the Bee Gees during the late 1950s. And Andy came to prominence in the late 1970s through the early 1980s with 8 singles reaching the top 20 of the U.S. Hot 100, 3 of which were number 1, including I Just Want to Be Your Everything. That was in 1977. Love Is Thicker Than Water. That was in 1977 as well. Shadow Dancing in 1978. In the early 80s, he co-hosted the American music television series Solid Gold. Remember? Did it with Marilyn McCoo and others. He also performed in a production of The Pirates of Penzance and Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Andy Gibb would later, of course, struggle through his life with drug addiction and depression, and he passed March 10th, 1988, 5 days after his 30th birthday. He left us with a lot of incredible music and incredible memories of him, gone way too soon. And again, of course, his brothers being the iconic Bee Gees. And he always thought about, whether he should be a Bee Gee or do his own thing. And he always decided he wanted to do his own thing. And then I think at some point there was talk about maybe bringing him into the Bee Gees as well. We've got some great photos, some great stories, and of course, lots of great memories as we celebrate this iconic figure. And welcome to the show, the author who has penned this incredible biography. Really is something special. You may even have some of the music in your own collection, some of these iconic songs. Of course, remember he was on the Midnight Special as well. And for a long time, he had an opportunity to be out there doing his thing. But again, it didn't come easy. Relationships didn't come easy. The pressures of the business, always trying to prove himself, always trying to, live up to probably, the expectations that were set forth. It's hard when your brothers are an iconic group like the Bee Gees to live up to that. But I tell you, Andy was very, very popular and beloved. There he is, of course, with Marilyn McCoo hosting Solid Gold. Remember that series in the 80s, that music series, which is very popular. And there, of course, he is singing with Victoria Principal, from Dallas and other shows. And they had a wonderful love affair, but unfortunately that love affair ended. And that took a toll on him as well over the years. It just really ate at him when they went in different directions. Of course, there he is with his brothers, Barry, Maurice, as well, Robin. You may remember we also had on our show Nick Endicott Gibb, who is the son of Maurice Gibb. If you didn't see that episode on the Jim Masters Show, check it out in our archives on our YouTube channel. It was amazing. He was looking for who his father was, and it turned out it is Maurice Gibb. And that is amazing. So that's really, he's very open and authentic and tells you that story. You can see that episode, but we're celebrating Andy here on the show, and we're going to be talking about so many incredible things. The book that he wrote, that Matt wrote, really is incredible. And we're so excited to welcome him here from Georgia. Let me tell you a bit about his background. He is extraordinary. He teaches history at Georgia Tech, where he earned his PhD. His publications are plenty. Greenbackers, Knights of Labor and Populists, Farm Labor Insurgency in the 19th Century South, Arkansas Gilded Age, The Rise, Decline, and Legacy of Populism, and working class protest, and so much more. Winner of the Arkansas Historical Association's awards, co-author of Georgia Tech's Campus History, also co-editor and contributing co-author of Reconsidering Southern Labor History, Race, Class, and Power, a winner of the United Association for Labor Education's award for the best book related to labor education. He's also the co-editor and contributing author to Gwinnett County, Georgia, and the Transformation of the American South, 1818 to 2018. And he's won awards from the Georgia Historical Records Advisory Council and the Gwinnett County Historical Society. He has also published biography for Andy Gibb, currently writing a biography of Olivia Newton-John. And you may remember there was a couple of times when Andy Gibb got a chance to do duets with Olivia Newton-John as well, including on Solid Gold. We are definitely going to have him back, Matt, when he gets that published and out there, because we want to celebrate Olivia Newton-John as well. So many incredible memories, folks. And the book itself, as I mentioned, really is a page turner. It's so beautifully written. Andy Gibb, one of the biggest pop stars of the disco era. Again, all those incredible songs, working on television specials. He became a fixture, appearing alongside legends like Bob Hope, George Burns, Dean Martin. In 1981, he became the co-host of the iconic Solid Gold television series. A year later, he starred in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat on Broadway. But despite his enormous success, he battled insecurity, depression, substance abuse, causing his career to flounder and leaving him, unfortunately, bankrupt in 1987. By then, he seemed ready to start anew and launch a comeback, but he died suddenly and unexpectedly in 1988, 5 days after, again, his 30th birthday. And despite the tragic brevity of his career and life, Andy Gibb still has a strong fan base around the world. I've always enjoyed his music. I always enjoyed seeing him on television, his interviews, performing on all the telethons, the charitable events he was a part of. I loved the times he was on with Marie Osmond, too. His story has never really been told until now. Arrow Through the Heart, the biography of Andy Gibb, draws upon extensive research, rare archival interviews with Andy Gibb and members of his family, and interviews conducted by the author with nearly 50 of Andy's friends and associates to examine the life and career of this beloved pop idol, who again, even today, is still missed. So a really special episode here. We invite you to drop a comment in the comments section. If you have a favorite Andy Gibb song, or maybe you love the Bee Gees as well, whatever the case may be, share some memories with us. And let's welcome our special guest coming to us from Georgia. Matt Hild is here. And Matt, welcome to the show, my friend. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here too.
You're very, very welcome. This is such a fascinating story, and it has a sadness to it, but at the same time, there were joyful moments in his life, and he did come from a loving family and, a supportive family, and his parents were in music, and his father in big band, had his own big band for a while, and so there was always music around in the house. For you, what was it about Andy Gibb that sort of drew you into where you wanted to actually write Arrow Through the Heart, the biography of Andy Gibb? And congratulations on it.
Thank you. And well, so much has been written about the Bee Gees, of course, because they were one of the biggest pop acts of all time. But Andy always seemed to be, kind of among writers as well as in real life, sort of in the shadow of his brothers, that all that you ever saw written about Andy, aside from a lot of tabloids and magazines of questionable accuracy, was he'd always be kind of chapter in a book in the Bee Gees, or kind of pop up here and there in a book in the Bee Gees. And really not many people had written those books about the Bee Gees really did that much research into Andy's life per se. It was more as covering Andy because he was the baby Bee Gee, a nickname that he hated, by the way. So I thought really it was time, especially while there were still people around, in another 20 years from now, a lot of the people working with them, won't be here anymore. So I thought it was imperative that somebody try to get people's memories about Andy kind of on the record before it was too late.
Now, were you always were you somebody who was an admirer of Andy's music and of the Bee Gees sound as well, or was that something that maybe developed as you were doing your research and digging into the Andy Gibb story?
I'd say both. I mean, I certainly knew who they were and who he was, and I'd seen TV appearances and heard the songs, but I certainly dove a lot more deeper into his work while I was writing the biography, and really came to appreciate his talent. I think more, the more I looked into what he'd done.
What were some things early on in the process of gathering the facts, the research, the information that may have surprised you about Andy? He could be playful, but he also had a shyness to him as well, didn't he?
Yeah, and I think it's kind of sad. One of the things that really struck me when I was doing the research and talking to people who knew him, as well as watching a lot of interviews that Andy had done, listening. I had people who were nice enough to send me audio recordings of interviews they'd done with Andy that were never heard, or only partially heard over the years. And he really was not only shy, but insecure in a lot of ways. That
Yeah.
even after, I mean, I think part of that was because he grew up, 9 to 12 years younger than the Bee Gees. And so when he's still, 9 years old, his brothers are international celebrities. So obviously that had to create a certain amount of insecurity, I suppose. But even after he had 3 number one hits, and even after he's starring on all these TV specials and Solid Gold, I think he still, I mean, even people who knew him well told me this, that they think that he always thought that he was somehow not quite the equal of, I think, even his own mother said that he never thought he was quite the equal of the Bee Gees, that he never quite lived up to them. And I think, a lot of people would say to the contrary. He was, his career didn't last as long, his life didn't last as long, but he was certainly a huge superstar during his day.
Absolutely right. Yeah, he was really on fire. All of his songs, one after the other, was extraordinary. And of course, he had a real closeness to Barry. He and Barry, there was a lot of similarities to their personality, and they were very, playful as brothers with one another. And he really looked up to his brother. And at the same time, Barry wanted to sort of guide him and show him different ways to get into this crazy business and sort of maintain. But then again, at the same time, Andy wanted to really try to carve out his own path. They were raised and born in England, then Australia, and then he came to America and tried to do his own thing.
Yeah, I think, it kind of cut both ways being the Bee Gees' younger brother. I mean, as Andy himself would often say in interviews, perhaps if he had been the younger brother of the Bee Gees, he never would have gotten his opportunity, he never would have gotten his chance. But on the other hand, that label, the BG, did kind of stick with him. And there was kind of a perception in the music industry in the late 70s that the Bee Gees, or Barry in particular, played, a major role in success. And even Andy would say in interviews that he felt that he really owed a lot of his success to Barry for writing the records and producing the records. And of course, that was true. But on the other hand, you can have the best songwriters in the world, the best record producers in the world, and if that performer doesn't have the talent, doesn't have the charisma, then the best writers and best producers in the world aren't going to help. So at the end of the day, it was still Andy who did it. But I think he was acutely aware that, of the role that Barry in particular played in that success.
Exactly right. Exactly. Uh, of course, they have a sizable family when they grew up in England, and then, of course, Australia. There was music always around Andy, right?
Yeah, I mean, even the parents, Hugh Gibb, the father, had been a band leader in the World War II era, and the mother, Barbara, had, to some extent been a singer in England, not really famous, but nevertheless, Hugh and Barbara were both active musically in the 40s and the 50s. And then, of course, by the time Andy's even born, the Bee Gees, Barry and Robin and Morris were already going down that path too of music. So for Andy, his whole life he grew up with music, and it was really in his blood.
It really, really was. And, it's interesting when you see those photos of him with the family when he was a young kid, because he looked so innocent and how he was looking up to his brothers, because there was quite a span age wise between Andy and Maurice, Robin, and
Yeah,
Barry. So
because
they, yeah,
Barry's born 1946, Robin Morris in 49, Andy 1958. So it's basically like 12 years from first to last among the sons.
I remember that interview too when he was on. I think it's when he was first introduced to Victoria Principal, the actress, of course. At that time, she was very involved with Dallas and very, very popular. And it was on, actually, I believe it was the John Davidson show. And
Right.
John Davidson is a friend of ours, and he's been on our show several times, three, four, five times he's been here. And he's a dear friend. And that's when Victoria was a guest and Andy was a guest, and there were some others, and they some sparks sort of flew on the John Davidson show between Victoria Principal and Andy Gibb, right?
Yeah, the story he always told was that a couple of days later he showed up at her house and she was sick, so he brought her like chicken noodle soup and roses. And I think within about a month or two they were living together.
I know, and this shot is from when they were singing. I believe it was on Solid Gold.
All I Have to Do Is Dream, the Everly Brothers song.
Yes, right, exactly. Dream, dream, dream. And you could see that he was really enamored with her and by her. He really fell hard and deep for Victoria Principal.
Yeah, I think that was the love of his life. And I talked to a lot of people who knew him right up to the end of his life, and it seemed to be a pretty unanimous consensus among people that he never got over Victoria Principal. That just it kind of stuck with him. Kind of was an on and off source of depression for him right to the end.
Yeah, he really fell hard when they broke up, and you could see that. As a matter of fact, he was hosting Solid Gold, and I thought he was great with it. There's Marilyn McCoo, there's Dionne Warwick, but then of course that got taken away because of not showing up for work,
Right.
and the things that were happening. I love how you have the book laid out. You really took time to respectfully honor Andy Gibb's memory. It's not a tabloid type of book. It really, it's open, and the wounds are there, but also the joy is there as well, and the honor of, and really remembering the memory of this incredible person who, again, was taken way too soon. What was that writing process like for you? How did you know how to start, how to really get the pen to paper and just put those first few words down on that paper?
Well, it was like you kind of just mentioned. It was kind of tricky because on the one hand, I mean, if you're going to write an honest biography of somebody, you have to look at the the highs and lows of their life. And of course, Andy Gibb had, I think I say this in the book, that Andy Gibb had some of the most spectacular highs that anybody could possibly imagine, but also some really, really rough lows. And so, I had to kind of cover both of that. But I also think that in the years after his death, a lot of the coverage of him, and even before he died, a lot of the coverage of Andy Gibb in the media tended to be negative, focused on the problems with his breakup Victoria Principal and the drug and alcohol problems, and Gang Fire from Solid Gold and Gang Fire from Broadway. So I thought in some ways I wanted to kind of recalibrate the picture of his life story. I mean, obviously all those things really did happen, but I think he also accomplished a lot and had an awful lot of good times those 30 years. I mean, he saw the world, he performed over the world, women loved him over the world, he had friends over the world. I mean, his life wasn't totally a tragedy. I mean, the way it ended was certainly a tragedy, and it certainly had tragic elements, but on the other hand, he also had a hell of a career and a lot of happy moments and joyous moments in his life. So I kind of wanted to put that balance back into the story, because I felt like all these magazine articles I was reading in the years after his death,
It's just negative.
It sounded like the whole thing was just a Greek tragedy, which those elements were in it, but that's by no means the complete story either.
Exactly right. Almost like a James Dean type of story, gone when you have somebody who's so big and beloved and is everywhere, television, stage, music. I mean, everything was coming his way. And then for it all to sort of come to a crashing halt, you think about that, the pressures of the industry alone to top yourself, to top what you just did, the success of what you did, because obviously the Bee Gees and the family, the Gibb family, super talented, all of them, and striving for excellence and perfection and pleasing people, and all of that adds up over time. And if you're coming out of the gate, really young, and you're being thrust, everything's being thrust at you, the good, the bad, the ugly, the temptations, whatever it is, it can be, as you're trying to make your mark, you're trying to maintain the fanfare, it can be overwhelming. And he was here, pretty much alone for a lot of it. And then, of course, his family, I know, in Florida as well. But he was really doing his thing here, trying to get through, navigate, LA and the music industry and all that. Not so easy to do.
Yeah, and really, I mean, you raise a good point there, Jim, because in terms of making the records, his brothers, especially Barry, were very much involved in writing songs, helping him write songs and producing records. But on the other hand, in a lot of ways, he was navigating everything by himself. The Bee Gees went with him on tour. The Bee Gees went with him when he was doing all these, the rounds of all the Midnight Special and American Bandstand and Don Kirshner's rock concert and all these TV specials with Olivia Newton-John and Dean Martin. So in a lot of ways, he really was. I mean, his parents were there to some extent. Sometimes, he had, personal managers and assistants with him. But in a lot of ways, he really was, doing this on his own at age 19, age 20, age 21. I mean, and then on top of that, the pressure of starting off your career with 3 straight #1 hits. I think I mentioned in the book, his father, Hugh, very presciently, as it turned out, told an interview in 1978 after Andy had racked up those 3 straight #1s, and Hugh Gibb, Andy's father, said, well, there's only one way to go after that, and that's down.
Could you imagine hearing that? I mean, that's not what that's not necessarily what you want to hear, because then that sort of gets locked into your psyche, and then you're struggling to make sure that you maintain not going down and not having things go down. I mean, there was so much he did, so much he accomplished, and so much more to do, so much additional promise. He was also a very charitable person as well. He was always involved in a lot of the telethons and the charity events. I always liked when he would have those kidding moments with Marie Osmond. You can see some of those videos online. They seem to just have a nice rapport. And there was in his later years, there was a video that I saw where they're singing Islands in the Stream together, right, at a telethon. And you can see the admiration that the two still had for one another, and working with Marie Osmond and Marie with.
Yeah, they were really, really close. That some of the people who I interviewed who knew Andy well in the late 70s, when basically he was trying to date Marie, and it never quite worked out because in many ways of the Marie and her family, of course, are Mormons, and Andy wasn't, and eventually people came aware of Andy's substance abuse problems too. So really it was impossible for Andy and Marie to have the kind of relationship that they might have had. But some of the people who knew Andy well at that time and spent a lot of time with him said what might have been if only there hadn't been all these roadblocks to Andy and Marie having a real relationship, because they really did have that kind of chemistry and that kind of closeness.
They really did. When sometimes when an actor or an actress is taking on a role or taking on a part, they really embody the character and they really get lost in the character, whether it's playing the role of somebody who is a real person or just, fictitious, made up for the story. You sort of take on some of the essence, and it goes to your heart. And in this case, here you are telling this story, there's legions of fans that want to hear it, read it, absorb it, and add it to all the other things that they've gathered over the years. But at the same time, you want to treat it with respect. You want to honor this young life that brought so much joy and music and talent to everybody that still you can hear today. But at the same time, I would imagine you felt for him, when you're digging into the research and really wanting to tell the story in such a beautiful and accurate and inspiring and impactful way. You almost feel like you're on the journey with them in a way, because you're telling all elements, the timeline, the people, all the countless interviews you did, all the research with people that knew Andy and all the rest. You almost feel like you can feel for Andy, right? Because you were so immersed for so long in his life as you were documenting and sharing with the biography.
Yeah, and like we were kind of mentioning before, I mean, there was certainly a certain amount of pathos to Andy's story that, those last few years of his life, he did struggle a lot, and it always seemed he was this close to turning the corner. And then, sometimes, through his own problems, sometimes just through sheer bad luck, he really did have, kind of the last 5 years of his life, this struggle where he's, climbing the mountain, about to come back, and then something happens, he goes back downhill. And of course, now we know how the story turned out. But, at that time, a lot of people who are still working with Andy, close to Andy, were always saying, this kid still has so much potential. He can come back to the top in any minute now. And, had he, and we'll never know, but had he lived longer, I think he probably would have had to come back at some point.
He was talking about that, because even towards the end, I think there was some discussion of that. And I think he had fallen ill at Robin's house in England, because Robin was sort of taking care of him, watching over him, and then brought to the hospital and all. And it came so sudden. It wasn't expected necessarily by him or the family, because he was sort of, there was a turnaround that he was excited. He was wanting to do more. He sort of got the idea of what you need to do a little bit more towards, unfortunately, the latter part. And then the body just was so worn out that it gave way, unfortunately, which just shocked the world when people heard that news. I like, as I was saying, the way you broke out the book. You start with the first chapter, words and music. Tell us about that. Tell us, and it's a fabulous chapter. Even the prologue is fantastic. But tell us about how you put it all together with, because the titles of the songs, some of the songs that he's saying, are so perfect for the titles of the chapters.
I mean, again, I guess you can find this with anybody's life if you look hard enough, but there was a lot of, irony and almost like, can't make this stuff up kind of aspects of Andy Gibb's life and career. And some of those song titles really did. Words and Music was the first song that he wrote and released in Australia before he even came to America. And in a lot of ways, that was what his, not just his life, but his whole family's existence was about, was, words and music. And at that point in Andy's career, when he's still in Australia working on his own, this is kind of another one of these things we'll never know, but he was really kind of going down this path of being a almost country pop type singer-songwriter, and writing and making music was very much his own. And then, I can't remember what the second chapter is called, but basically once Barry and his brothers start writing for him, it's a whole different sound. He goes from being this kind of, he always cited Don McLean, American Pie, as his biggest influence as a singer-songwriter. And, he kind of had, when he was on his own in Australia, he did kind of have this folkish sort of, sound. And then it gets to America, and Barry and his brothers start writing with him. It's, I Just Want to Be Your Everything and Shadow Dancing, and these almost kind of disco rock songs. They're nothing like the songs that he really wrote himself. So that became yet another dichotomy of his life, was that, in some ways the singer-songwriter that he might have been, had been on his own, ended up being a lot different than the recording artist and singer they turned out to be. But of course, the flip side of that was that obviously having his brothers, write these songs for him. I mean, nobody in the world would have turned down songs written by Barry Gibb or written by the Bee Gees in 1977, 78. So why did their own brother turn them down, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, hit after hit after hit. And Andy had a brief marriage and a daughter as a result of the marriage in Australia as well. And they didn't come to America, but he came to America to pursue his dream, I guess, maybe in hopes that he would return one day to Australia or what have you. But that's an interesting part of his life and story that people don't even know or they have forgotten.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those teen magazines, in fact, this is in the book, but what happened was when Andy got married at age 18, he and his wife came to America, and she got pregnant and then left, went back to Australia before she gave birth, and and that was the end of the marriage. And so Andy only ever saw his daughter once when she was 2 years old and came to Los Angeles with her mother. But Robert Stigwood, who was the impresario, the manager behind all the Gibb brothers, he really put pressure on Andy that we don't want you to be married. You're supposed to be the the hot new teen idol. It's not going to look too good if you can't be on the cover of 16 magazine and Tiger Beat with your wife and daughter.
Right, the branding and the image, and exactly everybody running to him and wanting to pull his shirt off, and all those things that are part of the branding of an individual, a performer, an entertainer. Yeah, and then of course that second chapter, which again plays off the title of one of his songs, "Thicker Than Water."
Right. I think you're right.
Yeah, "Thicker Than Water." Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, I think I'm even trying to remember now. I think that the reason I chose that as title for that chapter was that that's the point where his brothers, but especially Barry, really comes into his career. I mean, obviously, Barry and all three of Andy's brothers had kind of been his mentors, especially Barry. But again, Andy was on his own in Australia, age 16, 17, 18, writing songs, making his own records, and then he signs with Robert Stigwood, with the Gibbs impresario, head of the record company RSO. He signs Andy to a contract, basically to do for Andy what did for the Bee Gees, and make him a superstar. But of course, part of the deal is, again, if you've got Barry Gibb, nobody's going to turn down having songs with Barry Gibb. I mean, Barry Gibb was writing songs for Frankie Valli and Barbra Streisand. I mean, so obviously, why wouldn't he write songs for Andy? But so at that point, when Andy signs that contract, comes to America, that's when he kind of comes sort of annexed onto the Bee Gees. And so, Thicker Than Water, really, it kind of is an apt title of what happens to his, his life and his career at that point. That he's, after being on his own, working on his own for two and a half years in Australia, about 2 years, then all of a sudden he's kind of back in the family unit. And for the first time, they're working with him, to basically make him a star like they are.
And there were certain, I think, moments where there was a song or two that even surpassed the Bee Gees as well, which really was quite amazing.
Yeah, actually, the biggest hit of 1978 and the annual Billboard Hot 100 biggest hits of the year, "Shadow Dancing" was number one for 1978. And that was actually written by all four Gibbs, all four brothers. So you can't get much more Thicker Than Water than that, right?
Exactly right. Yeah, and you can still hear that. I mean, they had some sort of a magic to be able to create these songs that really resonated with people. I mean, when you just say "Shadow Dancing," all of a sudden you can hear the rhythm, you can hear his voice, a distinctive sound. The Bee Gees, obviously, or the Gibbs, their voices obviously cannot be replicated. The sound just so unique in so many different ways. Again, the story, when you do watch videos and you look at his life, you're sort of rooting for him in the latter years. But again, and at that time it was a different there was a lot going on. They say things are fast paced now, but back then there were a lot of temptations, or a lot of wild parties and all kinds of crazy things that get thrust upon you. And when you're young and you're on your own doing your own thing, you don't necessarily have that guidance to take you out or away from that. And the next chapter is After Dark. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, that was actually in the song title. It was also the name of his third album, a song Barry wrote for him. And, in a way, that's kind of when, I mean, not to be too cute about it, but that's kind of when things started turning dark in his career, that basically the things you just talked about, the temptations, and, Pam Dauber, who played Mork and Mindy, she became close to Andy in the 1980s because they starred in Pirates of Penzance in LA. And she told the story about how, everywhere Andy would go, people would be trying to stick, a spoon of cocaine from him so they could say, I did coke with Andy Gibb. And, again, he's, a late teens, early, and basically he's a college student. The age he is, he's a college student. How many college students could handle, Andy was, I think one of the guys who I interviewed who worked in this period said, Andy was playing little pubs and clubs in Australia one minute, next minute he's, on national television, and touring the United States and playing these huge sold out shows. And, everybody wants to be, be near him, be with him, buddy up to him. And unfortunately, in those days, cocaine was kind of like a social currency for that set, right?
Right, exactly. And people were, flying left and right, and you had Studio 54, and you had the discos, and you had, so much going on. Again, it was a lot of craziness happening. Me Without You, chapter 5. Again, the writing, your style, I love your style of writing. You keep us pulled in. You don't want to release us. You don't want to put the book down. There's so much to it. And again, the way that you do it in such detail, the countless hours of research, but you do it in a way that we feel like we're a part of the story, which I think is a fascinating way to write as a writer and a journalist. Tell us about Me Without You, chapter 5 in the book.
Well, that's the point where he really tries to some extent, at least, to break away from his brothers. That particular song, Me Without You, was a song he wrote by himself without Barry. And there was another song, it hit around that time, called Time Is Time, that was credited to him and Barry, but really Andy wrote it and Barry kind of made a couple of changes to it. And that's also the time when Andy moves to California. For several years, all the Gibb brothers, Robin was kind of as much in England as in America, but basically all four of the Gibb brothers and the parents were all living in Miami from about 1977 to 1980. And then Andy moves to California in 1980. And as it turns out, so the parents and so his little sister Bernice. But at any rate, so that chapter is kind of Andy, trying to break away from the, kind of the stranglehold. And I think, I've even mentioned this in the book. I found an unheard interview that was done with him a few years later, where he talked about part of the reason that he left Miami was that Barry was kind of even trying to sort of monitor his personal life. Now, perhaps a good reason, because, Andy, by his own admission, was getting some things they shouldn't be getting into. But, at that point, when Andy moves to California, it's really kind of a bold break. Especially Barry to kind of help, make him the superstar, and Andy moves across the country. And of course, that's also, where he meets Victoria Principal and gets involved in that relationship. And, and of course, once that's over, then, he's never quite back on track.
A lot of things went down. Yeah, the loss of Solid Gold, the loss of Victoria, Pirates of Penzance, the Joseph and Murray, the Technicolor Dreamcoat. There were a lot of things that were there that were fabulous opportunities, television, Broadway, all of it. The apples of everybody's eye at that time. And it's just, it was probably so much to try to handle, right? Too much to handle at once.
Yeah, if anything, it's amazing how many second chances he had, because I'm usually in show business,
right?
There's no room for a prima donna or difficult. And of course, he wasn't difficult in terms of personality so much, but obviously, if you're not showing up for recording sessions, you're not showing up for tapings of Solid Gold, you're not showing up for performances on Broadway, and all those kind of things can give a performer, that fat. I mean, Andy himself used to say it. It takes a long time to build up a reputation, and that fast to destroy it. And in essence, he destroyed his 3 or 4 times, and yet he kept getting all these second chances. And that's kind of amazing, a testament to not only his appeal, his popularity, his charisma, his talent, but also just how well liked he was. Like you said, everybody in the business was rooting for him too. So he kept getting all these second chances, but always seemed to kind of let them slip through his fingers in the end.
He was also, you and I were talking before we went live on air, he was seen on a lot of the television shows and the talk shows and so much of the day, working with Bob Hope and George Burns and so many others, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. And, in some ways, this was kind of proof that, or at least strong evidence that he was more than just a teen idol. And to Andy himself, that was one of his big concerns, was that he's a teen idol and he'd have a short career, because usually teen idols, don't last too long. But, like you said, he's on TV specials with George Burns and several Bob Hope specials, and Dean Martin. He's on all these talk shows like Merv Griffin and Mike Douglas. And, those shows aren't really aimed at teenagers, right? I mean, so he really did have this broad appeal among, cross age groups, across race, across gender. He really had a very wide appeal in a very kind of easygoing, affable manner. Of course, great camera presence that made him, really welcome on those shows.
His star rose rather quickly too. I mean, into international. Once he got to America and got going in America, it was extraordinary how his star power just went in that short window. The amount of work, the amount of music, the amount of songs and appearances, and is in a short window. It's some people, it would take years to be able to accomplish all of that. But in that time where he was really in his zone and doing it and nailing it, he really was on fire, right? His star was really rising fast.
Yeah, it really is almost like some kind of Shakespearean tale or something. I mean, rose so sharp, so fast, and then once the problems hit, went down really fast. His career was compressed, his life was compressed. But I think also, I mean, maybe this is another way in which his story was often misrepresented. That people always say, oh, he became a drug addict, or he let the breakup with Victoria Principal ruin him. I mean, there's some truth in that, but also what you just said. I mean, can you imagine being 18, 19 years, 20 years old, and you're under this pressure of, how do I come up with another number one hit? What am I going to do to stay relevant? That, to some extent, he has brothers guiding him in that, but in a lot of ways, he was also out there. In fact, Barry would say this to him, that, what you do is incredible. The three of us have each other. We've got each other. We're always together professionally. We've got each other on stage to support each other. Andy was out there alone, whether it's on the road or on these TVs. He's not going on there with any brothers. He's going on there. The spotlight's on him. 19, 20 years old. That had to be a hell of a lot of pressure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mentioned all of the charitable work that Andy did as well, which I thought was really, really cool. In 1979, he performed along with the Bee Gees and ABBA and Olivia Newton-John, and he did that duet, Rest Your Love on Me, at the Music for UNICEF concert at the United Nations General Assembly, which was broadcast worldwide. And then he returned to the studio to begin the recording sessions for the full final studio album, After Dark. There was a friendship. When I've seen those performances that he did with Olivia Newton-John, who we miss as well, and you're going to be penning a biography and a book on her as well. We're excited about that. There was something there. You could see when you look at her and when they're singing or they're together, how they had a wonderful friendship, but yet at the same time, you could see where she was sort of looking out for him, watching over him, almost like a sister. I felt that there's an energy there. She was a loving soul anyway, but there was an energy there of comfort. Like, it's okay. we're both from, Australia, what have you. We're here in America. We're trying to do our thing. I've got you. I've got your back. Kind of. I just felt that. Did you get that vibe too?
Oh, absolutely. They were very close friends. When Andy first came to America, and of course, actually, there was a short time in America where he was here without being a superstar yet, because there was a gap of about 6 months between finishing the first album and anything being released. And during that time, he's living actually with his wife in West Hollywood in the same apartment complex as Don Knotts, no less. Things you can't make up. Barney
What was the name of the complex?
Mayberry? the Knolls. But Barney Fife's knocking your door. Turn that music down.
Right. Like Mr. Roper.
Yeah, exactly. Company. A better example, because that was probably during the Three's Company.
During that Three's Company time.
but at any rate, so even when Andy's in Los Angeles and not quite famous yet, he's going, Olivia had all these Australian friends they called the Gum Leaf Mafia. And so Andy's going, to concerts with Livy and other friends of theirs, and like people the Bee Gees worked with, like songwriter Steve Kipner, or actually it was Steve's father worked with the Bee Gees. But at any rate, so, and then when Andy makes it big, Olivia has him on her next two TV specials. She does the 2 duets on the album with him. She does, like you mentioned, UNICEF concert. She does Solid Gold with him. And oftentimes, even, during Andy's good times and bad as well, though most times are really bad, kind of nobody really sees him. But nevertheless, he would often be at Olivia John's ranch in Malibu, horse riding. They both loved horse riding, loved horses. Later on, she had those Claw Blue stores. Andy would often show up at the grand openings of these Claw Blue stores. You see him, in fact, only about a year before Andy died, there's this photograph of Olivia and Andy hugging each other, this big smile both their faces at the opening of her Claw Blue store in Miami. And his funeral, when he died in March 1988, she was one of the very few, of all of his famous friends. A lot of them, of course, in fairness, it was by invitation only, the funeral, but I think if more celebrities, if they called the parents, they could have been there. But Olivia was there, and she spent the funeral. She's actually with the Bee Gees and their parents. And I talked to a gentleman who sat next to her actually during the service, and he said she's like weeping as the service is going on. So yeah, Olivia and Andy cared for each other very deeply, I think.
Sandra Hawkins is here. We welcome everybody watching. I'm Jim Masters, and Matt Hild is here. He's the author of Arrow Through the Heart, the biography of Andy Gibb. He's also a historian, and he's with Georgia Tech there in Georgia. He's immersed. He's had a long day. He's been on campus. She says Barry's son said the only time he saw his father cry was at Andy's funeral.
Yeah, I've heard that too. And I believe it, that Barry and Andy were very close. Barry would later say things like, I lost my best friend when I lost Andy. And he'd talk about how he and Andy were like twins in many ways, even though they're born 12 years apart. And, I think Barry felt not guilt because he didn't do anything to cause Andy's demise, but I think he felt he felt regret. I think that he, after the fact, what could I have done? That even Barry said this in interviews that it went through his head 1,000 times. What could I have done differently? What else could I have done to help Andy? And so, yeah, I think all of the brothers, but Barry especially, I think was very affected. And for that matter, Morris too. I think Morris talked about how he actually, Morris had a drinking problem and overcame it, and he relapsed into drinking again after Andy died. So, and the father Hugh only lived 4 years. In fact, Hugh Gibb died on March 6, 1992. It's like one day after what would have been Andy's
a heart attack, I think. Or
and so I taught some people who said that they saw would see Hugh Gibb at places after Andy's death, and he seemed to be like his happy old self, but if somebody brought up Andy's name, it was like his face would turn ashen, and he would just all of a sudden snap it like into this depression. So I'm obviously right. I mean, anytime you lose a family member age 30, and certainly I think Barry was very close to Andy. Morris and Robin to a lesser extent, but I think they got closer at the end. And Hugh and Barbara, the parents, especially during those during the 1980s, the Bee Gees weren't touring for most of the decade, the Bee Gees were working more behind the scenes with, with Streisand, with Dionne Warwick, and with Kenny Rogers, Islands of Stream, Kenny and Dolly Parton. So Andy was the one who was doing the TV shows and doing the Las Vegas shows and performing at state fairs and whatnot. So the parents really spent a lot of 1980s with Andy, and so they kind of saw all those ups and downs like up close. So I think it really, really hit them hard. And of course, Barbara Gibb, the mother, had to outlive Barbara Gibb had to outlive 3 of her 4 sons, as it turned out.
I know it really was something. I want to welcome all the Andy Gibb and Bee Gees fan clubs who are also watching right now from around the world. If you are an Andy Gibb fan, a Bee Gees fan as well, drop a comment in the comments section. Let us know what are your favorite songs, favorite memories. How much did Andy and of course his brothers with the Bee Gees impact you? When you do hear their music and all the songs, it does make you feel good. It takes you back in time, but it does make you feel good. The 6th chapter, Any Dream Will Do. That's a great one. Tell us about that one for our viewers watching, Matt.
Well, that song was actually, still is. I mean, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat lives on forever, right? And so Andy was one of the early Broadway stars, not the first, but he was one of the, kind of a succession of people playing Joseph in the Broadway production. And, at that point, he'd already done some theater. He'd done the Pirates of Penzance, Los Angeles. He'd done a theatrical musical for the Showtime cable channel. But in some ways, kind of maybe the irony of that title is that by that point, theater was pretty much the only opportunity he had left, because his recording career, he'd kind of, in a lot of ways, he kind of walked away from it. And then, he's fired from Solid Gold. So he could still be a guest star on things, but nobody was eager to hire him for like a regular weekly series because they thought he's not reliable. And eventually goes into like Las Vegas as last resort. But at that time, getting that starring role on Broadway really was this huge opportunity for him, and really a chance for him to totally get back on track. And of course, later on, Donny Osmond had that role about 8 or 9 years later, and it really helped resurrect Donny Osmond's career. And so, for Andy, that opportunity to star on Broadway as Joseph really, that was his chance to kind of resurrect the dream and get himself back on top. But unfortunately, this wasn't that long after the breakup with Victoria Principal. At that point, Andy actually started dating briefly Tanya Tucker, and she writes in her autobiography about how she pretty quickly realizes that he's still so hopelessly fixated on Victoria Principal that it's impossible for any other woman to have a relationship with him. And he still wasn't, he kind of got off drugs for a while and then got back on while he was in New York City. So, in some ways that, that period of his life when he was in Joseph was kind of, his last best shot, get back on time. He wasn't even far from being on, it had been very long. That was a good chance where he could have really gotten himself back on track. And, came, kind of like everything in those last 5-6 years of his life, came that close and, couldn't quite cross the finish line.
And you can see markedly in television interviews as it goes along, the change in him, the physical appearance, a little weight gain, an exhausted look, a look of nervousness a little bit, I got to do this. I got to find ways to get back. I got to keep, you felt that when you see some of the later things where he's chatting with people and interviewing, you can see that he really tried to keep things going the best as he could, but then the demons would come in, depression and everything else. I remember I saw there was a concert. It was in South America. There was a really huge concert in South America, and there were thousands and thousands of people there. And he didn't look as good. He looked, like it was tough, but he knocked it out of the park, but sweating profusely, and his hair was permed because of the fact that he had that role. But I think it was in South America, and there were thousands of people, but he just really looked like it was tough to get through that because, again, everything that was in his system was making itself known.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. In fact, I know a lot of the, long time and, dedicated Andy Gibb fans on these, social media groups, or read the comments even, the very videos you just alluded to, you watch those on YouTube, read the comments. Some of them will actually say things like, this is sad. You can tell, like, Andy's spark is gone already. He's only like 26. I think maybe that's a bit harsh. And the talent was still there. But you're right. I think he was struggling. In fact, it's in the book. But when he's actually on a flight to South America for that tour, one of the musicians he's sitting next to, Andy starts telling the musician on the flight about how much he loved Victoria Principal and how heartbroken. It's like 2 years later, and he still can't get over it. And he was definitely having, he was still using drugs on and off. By this point, he's being rushed to the emergency room for like stomach and chest pains and thinks he's having a heart attack. And of course, that turns out to be a pretty ominous, because basically dies of like stomach and chest pains that turned out to be inflammation of the heart. So, by that point, I think what you see in those videos from 1984, and like you say, of course, I mean, everybody gets older, obviously, but still, I think in his case, you can really see in those last 4 years of his life that he looks like he aged quite a bit. And, he doesn't look like the Islands of the Stream video you talked about, where he sings with Maria Osmond at the Children's Miracle Network Telethon in 1986. I mean, his face was kind of puffy and bloated. And I think basically a lot of these things you're describing were symptoms of the, of what kills him eventually, the inflammation of the heart.
Exactly. Yeah. And, that the news was incredible when when people heard it. You also have in chapter 7, Andy's Song. Tell us about that one.
So that title was actually the title. I don't know if it was the title when he wrote it, but Andy wrote a poem in 1985 as he's going through rehab at the Betty Ford Center. And I couldn't, I didn't put the lyrics, the whole lyrics in the book because they're copyrighted, but I've got I think a link in the bottom of the page, it's not hard to find online. And actually, it was Andy wrote words and never wrote any music to it. So it ended up being kind of a poem really. And at Andy's funeral, Barry read that as part of the service. And I'm sure a lot of the Andy fans who are watching this probably have read it online, but if not, it's really worth reading because it's really kind of this powerful self-examination where he's basically kind of trying to sort through his mind. You get the sense in a way he doesn't want to do this anymore. He doesn't want to be out on the road anymore. He doesn't want to be, trying to make a comeback. But at the same token, he also says, but I've worked so hard for this. This is all I've ever known. Almost a sense of, I can't not keep trying. So it really, in some ways, that becomes, I think, one of the factors that made the last years of his life tough. That a part of him maybe wanted to walk away from it, but he also felt all this pressure of, being a Gibb, being a star like the rest of his brothers, and the fact that he did love music, and he had put so much work into it over the years, and also I think, frankly, kind of the sense of what else would he do? I mean, he actually got a pilot's license, and when he got clean in the final part of his life, he actually got his pilot's license, but nobody's going to hire Andy Gibb as a pilot. I mean, basically, so that was part of his problem too. It's like he's only 29 years old at this point. What's he going to do with his life if he's not an entertainer? He didn't have college degrees. He didn't have, what else was he going to do?
Exactly right. Yeah. And there were times, he was physically active. They did tennis and all kinds of, swimming, all kinds of cool things with the brothers. And, that was all happening along the way as well. But, he's an extraordinary talent that's still missed today by so many people. And I've always thought his songs were terrific and that he really gave his all. I mean, the whole Gibb family, the Bee Gees, they've left such an indelible mark on society, on culture. Even Andy, in his way, left a big mark in that time period. But again, of course, his brothers are involved in music, especially Barry, for other people as well. just an extraordinary legacy. The
Just about
family.
forever, right? I mean, obviously, sadly, two of the Bee Gees didn't live as long as they should have either. But the Bee Gees' career spanned, basically almost into 4 decades, and of course, Barry's career kept going on even after, after Morris and Robin were gone. So Andy, it was much more compressed. But a couple of kind of interesting stories. One thing that I was really surprised to see after this book came out, I figured the book would appeal to basically kind of, mid to late baby boomers and kind of first half of Generation X. I was astonished to see how many like 20, 25-year-old, mostly female, which Andy himself would appreciate, I'm sure. But basically all these, women who were born in 1998 or 2002, and somehow, I guess,
almost
through
like
YouTube,
new music
became
to
huge
them.
Andy Gibb fans. Yeah, so I mean, he really has this following among, not as big as say the following of somebody who's contemporary, but still a much bigger following than for a performer who died in 1988. And I guess that, in some ways that's the power of YouTube. That the records are still there, and you still buy CDs or used records, whatever, stream them. But I don't think a lot of people, and the way I think a lot of these younger fans discovered Andy was through YouTube. And then something else is just, before we went on the air, you and I were talking about Ben Omar and Barry Mayer Publishing, who published this book. And I had like 4 or 5 publishers turning me down before I went to Ben, simply because they kept, one of them was like, I won't name them, but one like, pretty well-known publisher was like this close to publishing the book. And at the last minute, they said, "Why just talk to our marketing department? And we're not sure that enough people care about Andy Gibb anymore to justify publishing a book on. We're afraid nobody will just fall into the abyss." And
Crazy.
I think that the week the book came out, People Magazine gave it a 5-page spread. I was on Good Morning Australia. The book, the book found, so hats off to Ben Omar, because he was
absolutely, he believed in it and saw that it was, oh yeah, there's and people, maybe the pandemic thrust some of this. A lot of people are craving nostalgia a little bit. They're craving the TV shows they grew up with, the music that they heard maybe growing up, or just trying new things. Like you say, some of the folks that are teens, 20s, hearing it and liking the rhythms, the beats, the melodies, the lyrics, the whole bit, because it's fresh and it's new to them, even though it's music that's been around. It's fresh and new to them, and it's different than a lot of the super synthesized, digital, auto-tuned stuff that you can hear out there that sometimes sounds the same. This has the rhythms and real instruments and the beats and all the rest. And it could really appeal to somebody that hasn't heard it before. So many people still loving hearing it now, even to this day. I always thought that there was never really, there's been, documentaries, there's been, True Hollywood Story, and these kinds of things, looking at his life and what have you, but not really a definitive per se biography in this way until now. Why do you think that is, Matt?
That's a good question. I don't know. In some ways, you mentioned the pandemic, and actually that was part of what led me to write the book, was because all the usual archives and whatnot for doing research were, of course, off limits in 2020 and well into 2021. But also, the more I got thinking about it, I thought, why hasn't anybody written about Andy Gibb? It's not like he was some, one-hit wonder that nobody remembers. He was, like you and I have been saying, for a solid 5-6 years. You couldn't turn on the radio or turn on TV without seeing Andy Gibb, and there's millions of people who remember him fondly. And actually, one person who was a good friend of Andy's said to me something that, and this guy's a writer, and he said he'd actually thought about writing Andy's story himself, but that he thought it'd be really hard to kind of get to the bottom of what really happened. And plus, since he was a friend of Andy's, it would be kind of depressing for him to get into it. And I think maybe that was part of it, that there was a strong element of pathos to his story. And that, I think one person early on, a publisher I was talking to about it, said something like, well, how can you write this book and not make it sound like just this, horrible, depressing story? And hopefully I didn't make it sound entirely like a horrible, obviously that, what happened to him, the fact he died so young, you can't skirt around the tragedy of that. But on the other hand, again, he did have a great career, garnered millions of fans all over the world, still has a lot of fans. He did have, there's so many photos online where he's, smiling, looks, I mean, to some extent, maybe that's posed. But on the other hand, I think he did have an awful lot of good times in his life. He had a lot of bad times too. But, I think in some ways, it is he was kind of a daunting person to take on to write a biography of. I mean, it's a complicated story.
Was there anybody that was resistant, that didn't want to, be interviewed, or just didn't want to be a part of it? Or because it seems like like I said, you had access to a wealth of people who wanted to. I mentioned extensive research, archival interviews with Andy Gibb, members of the family, interviews conducted by you with nearly 50 of Andy's friends, associates, to examine the life and career of the beloved pop idol. What was that process like, even contacting people and getting them to sort of relive the whole story?
Yeah, it was, naturally, and this was something I thought of when I started writing the book was, I didn't want to do just a rewrite of what's been written about Andy in books in the Bee Gees, or, what magazines wrote about Andy, or what these, like documentaries said about Andy. I wanted to be, untold parts of the story. But, I was a little bit concerned about that for one thing, because Andy had gotten so much negative press coverage from, even late in his life and, after his death, certainly that people might think that, oh, here's some guy who's going to do a hatchet job on Andy's memory. And, frankly, I think that, some people who wouldn't talk to me, that was kind of their attitude, and I couldn't convince them. Other people who I talked to, they were a little bit leery at first, and then I think when they realized I was trying to just tell them a story, then they opened up more. Other people just, in fact, you were talking about Marie Osmond, so I don't know Marie Osmond, but I was able to, through kind of another intermediary, get a request to her, and her reply was, talking about Andy for publication is something I'd rather not do, which, I respect. Obviously that's her right. But, but that shows you some people, I think for some people just, there's still a sadness there. They don't really want to revisit.
Exactly. And maybe they would just automatically assume that it was going to be more of a tabloid sort of story,
I think that was part of it, because
yeah,
that's what they were used to. That, when Andy died, all these tabloids, after Andy died, Andy Gibb dies of drug overdose, which wasn't true. And, Andy Gibb, begging mother for drug money, all these, lurid made up BS stories. And for a month after he died, that was over tabloids all over the US and England, and all these, kind of hard copy type TV shows doing these, kind of trashy looks at his demise. And so I think, for some people, that's what they assumed I was going to be doing.
It's amazing how society builds somebody up and then likes to tear them down. They do that with idols. They do that with heroes. I never understood that part.
Yeah,
That's more of a psychological conversation. Why people do that? Do you want to even reach the top? Because
it's funny, because one of the last songs Andy recorded and wrote with Barry Morris, the title of the song was "The Price of Fame."
See, that makes.
I think all four of them knew the price of fame.
Yes, they've all had experiences with it, and you see that. Look at Michael Jackson, look at Prince, look at so many others. That Whitney Houston,
right?
Now we just lost Whitney's mother. It's just, and she probably had a broken heart. Even her granddaughter, Whitney's daughter, just so trying. And whenever you hear Whitney Houston's voice, it's like, wow, it's just one of those iconic, beautiful voices. Yeah. One of our viewers said you need to, they're putting their orders in. Actually, one already said that she didn't know there was a biography on Andy Gibb, and she's putting the order in already. Went right to Amazon, and it looks like it's Nikki. She goes, I never knew there was a biography on Andy. That's why you always watch the Jim Masters show. You learn something new. It's now in my Amazon cart.
I hope you like it, Nikki.
How cool is that, right?
Yeah.
That is really, really cool. And I think it was at Marty Thompson. I think, Marty, thank you for your support and your super chat there. We appreciate that. Good day, Jim. He's from Australia originally, but lives in Nashville, Tennessee. Had the pleasure to perform with Robin Gibb.
Nice.
He's watching as well.
Real nice.
Yeah, I mean, it really is something. And
all four of those guys are just tremendous. I mean,
that whole Saturday Night Fever album, Stay Alive, and all those songs.
The way they wrote, just everything.
That was just really, really cool stuff on so many different levels. Also, how appropriate that chapter 8 is, don't throw it all away. Yeah,
and I know that at one point somebody was encouraging me to actually give that title to the book, but I thought that would be a little bit too dark, in a way. If I'd given the book that title, that would have almost confirmed people's fears that it was going to be kind of a, tabloid, kind of exploitative. But on the other hand, the part of his life and career that chapter covers really is when he's on this, kind of precipice of, is he going to come back or is he going to, go down the drain? And, he comes this close, and that's one of the tragedies of his life. He kind of pulls himself up. He gets himself, he kind of disappears from, except for occasional charity things and TV shows and whatnot. But for the most part, he's very low profile in 1986, 87. But he's going through rehab again. He's getting himself clean, playing tennis moves back to Miami, playing tennis with Barry all the time. And he's learns to fly. Obviously you can't learn to fly an airplane if you're, have a drug or alcohol problem. And he's, it looks like he's really this close. So it's kind of like, this point, it's like, is he going to go, is he going to come back or, kind of last chance? Is he going to come back or is he going to, go down the tubes? And when he's still in Florida, he's like this close. And then when he goes to England, of course, at the very end, that's when, it comes to its unfortunate and tragic conclusion.
I know. And it's interesting because the final is Hell or High Water, and so appropriate.
And that's another one of the 4 songs. There are 4 songs that Andy wrote with either Barry and Morris or with all 3 of his brothers and recorded. And he got a recording contract with Island Records, which in those days was based in London, but a huge label. And U2 was on Island Records. And so Hell or High Water was the name of one of those 4 songs. And the reason I thought that was an appropriate title for that chapter is that, that was kind of the situation he was in. When he went back to England about 6 weeks before he died, and I say went back, he was born there, he had lived there a long time. When he went to England 6 weeks before he died, I think he felt, and it's not just me thinking that. Barry said that probably in interviews that Andy felt like he was under enormous pressure. That all those years when he was kind of struggling to get himself cleaned up and straightened out, that was kind of excuse for why his career wasn't really going, because he had all these problems. But he'd been clean and sober and seemingly healthy for about a year and a half. So it was kind of hell or high water. It was time to I hate to say do it or die, but that's almost kind of what it came down to. And I think Barry said in some interviews after Andy died that Andy put so much pressure on himself that it was kind of like his heart and his mind gave way under all the stress, that he was so concerned about whether or not he could come back and be a big star again. And again, his chronic insecurity, this feeling that he wasn't as good as his brothers, or I don't think many other people felt that way by that point. But still, I think that Hell or High Water, it's ironic. The titles of 3 of those last 4 songs, Air Through the Heart, where the chorus line is Andy saying, "I'm too young to die," and then The Price of Fame, which he certainly knew about and lived, and then Hell or High Water, that was basically kind of the situation he was in. He went back to England 6 weeks before he died, and when he goes over there, it's it looks like everything's in place for him, and then 6 weeks later he's dead.
It was a shock to the world. People really, I remember people just really being devastated. I mean, legions of fans just devastated and confused and not knowing why, especially when somebody's, he just turned 30 and
Yeah, it's
just,
barely.
yeah, very, very young. But again, left such a legacy, and it really, I've seen interviews where Barry tears up, and they just, the loss is so great and profound, and now Barry is the remaining of the brothers, the last one standing, which is really quite amazing. And of course, there's the sister as well. She doesn't get as much coverage or talked about, but
Mostly.
yeah, the sister is.
Yeah, she's in Australia, and really, she was the of Hugh and Barbara's 5 children, and they kind of raised Leslie's oldest daughter, Bernice, who tragically passed away in 2021. But Leslie was the one who, the only one of Hugh and Barbara's 5 children who stayed out of the limelight and basically got involved in raising dogs in Australia and had many kids and grandkids. And from everything I'm not that I know her, but from everything I've heard, she's had a very happy family life. So in a way that proves, I guess, it's kind of a dichotomy. It's like, which path do you go down? Do you go down the path of, fame and fortune? You go down the path of like a more normal life. And, it's one of the things that Robin Gibb said not long before he died in 2012. Robin Gibb told an interviewer that he felt that the Gibb family was paying like a current price, like that the family had been cursed in a way, because, the 4 brothers had this huge success, but, Andy dies at 30, Morris dies at 53, Robin dies at 62. And like I said, Barry, the oldest brother, ends up being, he's often, tearfully said that in interviews that he can't believe that, his 3 younger brothers and now they've been gone for anywhere from 12 to 36 years. So it's, and then, and Leslie's the firstborn child. So she's, she and Barry are the 2 survivors.
Exactly. What are some things you learned about, and I'm sure there's a lot, about Andy Gibb that you didn't know, or that sort of finished the sentence for you about him and his life and his contributions as you were writing that?
Well, one thing that, it wasn't so much that surprised me. I think, to some extent came across in his interviews, or at least, maybe before the later years, when, as you pointed out in the later interviews, he often seems kind of nervous or concerned. But one thing that did surprise, again, it didn't shock me, but still, so many people I talked to always, Andy Gibb was the nicest person I ever knew. Andy Gibb's the sweetest person I ever knew. Andy Gibb would give the shirt off his back. Andy did so much for charity that, I think he really was a very genuinely, kind, warm person. I think to some extent, that was part of his appeal too, that, that kind of came across when he's on stage.
It did, didn't it? Yeah, it really did. Sort of the boy next door charm, where the young ladies were screaming for him, but the the moms and everybody else were like, he's a nice guy.
Yeah, I think that, again, that's why he worked. He fit on shows like Bob Hope and Dean Martin and George Burns, or Mike Douglas and Merv Griffin, because kind of the mothers of his fans, they found him appealing too.
Right. Right, exactly. What's the feedback you've been getting from the book so far, Matt? And again, congratulations on it.
Yeah, thank you. Mostly positive. There's always some naysayers, but overall, most of the people who I interviewed, some of whom were kind of leery of talking to me, after it came out and they read, they said, thank you. I think you did a fair job with kind of a tough topic, and the book got more attention, frankly, than I didn't think that nobody would care about, because if that had been the case, I wouldn't have written it, obviously. But compared to some of these publishers told me, Andy Gibb, forget, nobody remembers him anymore. So I was gratified to see it. That wasn't the case. That a lot of people did notice the book and did buy it, did care about it.
And like you say, the feedback is really, really good, which is great. And, sometimes it is hard when you're touching upon subjects and you have fans, and sometimes it could be a super fan. And sometimes there can be almost a possessive, like they possess him, they own his story. You can't say anything or judge anything or write anything or do anything. You have to leave it just like that. And it can sometimes it even get in the way of the telling of the story. But when you get the love and the support of people who have loved the subject of the book, in this case Andy Gibb, it must make you feel real good, huh?
Yeah, and I couldn't have done it without. I mean, basically, and that was one of my concerns at first, was that if nobody who knew Andy is going to talk to me, then I've got no book. And like I said, some of them were some were willing to right away, others were never willing at all. Others I kind of had to coax or convince that I wasn't out to tear apart his memory or his legacy. But yeah, I think that not every I didn't hear back from everybody I talked to, but a number of people who I interviewed who knew him as well as anybody really did say, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back about it, but they did say that I think you did a fair job. That I'm glad you did this, because in fact one of the guys, if he's watching tonight, shout out to Rick Latempia out in Texas. Rick Latempia was one of Andy's band members late in his career, late in his life. And when I first talked to Rick, he said something like, it always bothered me that Andy had become kind of a forgotten superstar after he died. Just think back, again, as you well know, and back in the day, everybody knew who Andy Gibb was. He was all over the place. And then, as the decades went by, his memory kind of, obviously it didn't go away among his fans, but he really wasn't getting any attention from the media anymore either. So I think, if the book had any value to people, that was part of it, was just trying to, kind of get Andy's story out there, or at least as well as I could with the, people who would help me get it out there before it just, kind of vanished.
I think it's fantastic. And the fact that you did it. And when I spotted it, I said, oh, let's definitely celebrate this artist and remember the artist and the contributions, and remember that the artist, the star, the pop icon, was also a human being with feelings and fears and hopes and dreams and desires like we all have. It's just that his world played out on stage, played out on television, played out in front of us, and not always easy to have happen. But
No.
he was somebody, again, who in that short period of time really left an indelible mark. His songs are still played on the radio and streaming services today. He's got his own Spotify channel and everything else. His music's still out there. It still sells. And he's in the annals of music history, but in the hearts and minds of so many people. And really, this was great that you decided to dig in, and we didn't want to give the whole book away because there's a lot of nuggets in there and a lot of really cool things, and you take us down different avenues, which I think is great. But overall, people getting a good feel for the book. Was there somebody in mind that you wrote this for? Was it for the super fan? Was it for the person who didn't know as much about Andy but maybe heard the name in passing? Was it a specific reader you had in mind, or you felt like a music buff, somebody who just loves legends or iconic people? Or did you not necessarily have a specific reader in mind? It's for anybody.
Well, I mean, ideally you'd like to think that any book you write is for anybody, but that's probably not too realistic, right? But I think the group I had in mind were kind of, again, when I was writing it, I didn't really have much idea that there was this, like younger generation of Andy Gibb fans out there. So, the readers I had in mind were more like the original generation Andy Gibb fans. So the people who, grew up buying the records and watching on TV and going to his concerts and all that. And to some extent, it was aimed at Bee Gees fans too, because, obviously most Bee Gees fans were Andy Gibb fans and vice versa. And again, there've been a lot of books written about the Bee Gees. In fact, another one came out like right after I published the book in the Andy. So, and that was part of what kind of motivated me was, obviously I understand why there are a lot of books in the Bee Gees, and there should be, but I thought there needs to be at least one book out there about Andy Gibb before it's too late.
Exactly right. Yes. Shyman 99 had said something about why did he stop recording in 1981, but he was still recording beyond 81.
Well, not commercial. I mean, he didn't make any records after. In fact, you showed the picture before of Andy and Victoria Principal saying, "All I have to do is dream on solid gold." That was actually the last record he released,
That
during
was
his
the last
lifetime.
one. Yeah.
And then he was, I mean, there were some things he recorded here and there, like
Here and there.
demos, but but they never came out. It was basically, he didn't really get serious about getting back to making records until the summer before he died. And in fact, 2 of those tracks eventually came out, but 2 others haven't. But basically, had he lived another six months or so, but those years after 81, and for one thing, he wasn't with RSA Records and Robert Stigwood anymore. And the Bee Gees kind of walked away from Stigwood and RSA themselves not long after that. And he was doing other things. He was doing Solid Gold. He was doing Pirates of Penzance and Joseph, Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. But again, part of it was that, again, he narrowed his own opportunities, that there weren't too many producers of weekly TV shows who wanted to take a chance on him. There weren't too many record companies that wanted to take a chance on him. There weren't too many, Broadway producers that wanted to take a chance, because, he'd proven to be
not reliable.
Just like what he said in interviews, it takes forever, a long time to build a reputation, and that quick to ruin it. So basically, after about 82, 83, he kind of was, I think one person I interviewed who was working in the band at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco, the nightclub there, Andy played there in 1986. And he said, we were kind of worried about, whether or not he was going to, it was like a 2-week engagement, like 2 shows a night, 6 nights a week for 2 weeks in the showroom. And he said, we were kind of holding our breath because we were worried, Andy's reputation, would he show up? And he did show up, but that was kind of the, he had a ways to go to really, to prove to a record company. Again, he did get the record contract finally right before he died, but it kind of took that long for him to get himself back on track and to convince people that he was together enough to get a second chance.
Exactly. What's 1 or 2 things that you were left with when you put that last sentence in and the period on that last word in the book? What were some things you were left with? Because, I know a lot of people tell me when they've written books, sometimes, the subject, the characters in the book almost become like their kid. I mean, it's like their baby, like they're really watching over it and caring for it. And when you just knew, when did you know it was finished? When you were comfortable to say, the story's told, maybe a couple of rewrites, what have you, but I'm good. Now let's get it out there and get it published. How did you know, and what was that like?
Well, I mean, like you said, it is kind of a hard, with any book you write, I guess it's kind of like a recording artist of the record. Like, how many times can you keep doing overdubs? How many times can you keep, remixing it? But basically, once I felt like once I felt like I got into all the people who were going to talk to me, once I felt like there was nobody else out there. Although, as it turned out, after the book came out, I did hear from a number of people who worked with Andy, knew Andy well, who I couldn't even locate. I mean, again, some people were easier to locate than others. So there were a few people who reached out to me and said, I wish you had found me. I would have. That's what I wish I'd found you too. So unfortunately. But once I felt like really I'd exhausted all the resources that I had, then, there was, if I felt like there was anything still out there that I could have gotten a hold of that would have added to the story, then I would have kept going. But once I felt like I've got all of the material I'm going to get to write the book out, once I've got it, then this is time to finish it.
And you did, and it really is a terrific read. Really, anybody who's an Andy Gibb fan, or maybe they've just heard about him, they're a Bee Gees fan, perhaps they just love music, or they love stories of people's lives. It's a really, really good one, and again, treated with respect and honoring him, telling the stories, not leaving any stone unturned, but also paying homage to this talent. And I think the use of the arrow through the heart is so appropriate for the title, with the biography of Andy Gibb. It just, because you almost feel like that in certain ways. That's what had happened to him, that there was a little bit of an arrow through his own heart. Very terrific use, appropriate use of that from the song for the title.
Yes, sadly, I mean, it's it's too bad that that's the case, but and that was basically my logic in choosing that song title for the title of the book, because it was the last song he ever recorded, and the prophetic chorus, "I'm too young to die." I mean, again, you can't, things that you just can't make up, and of course, that wasn't the intent for sure when he and Barry and Morris wrote the song, and it wasn't anybody's intent it was recorded, but you're right. It certainly proved to be a fitting epitaph to his career and his life. That's the last song he ever writes and records.
Absolutely. And so you're working on an Olivia Newton-John book, and some of our viewers commented and said he's got to do a book on Farrah Fawcett. They're putting orders in already for you, Matt.
No, I mean, we'll see. I mean, you can only write so many books, but Olivia to me seemed like a natural next step. In fact, I got to interview Olivia by email. At the time, I thought, oh, darn, I wish I could have gotten to talk to her. But, I now realize when I got to interview her, basically, I got to send her through one of her representatives, like a short list of questions, and she answered them for me. And I, coordinated the book. And, I now realize that at that time, she was already, this is like a year before she died, she was already very ill. But certainly, and that seemed like that book seemed like, Olivia seemed like a natural next topic after Andy, because again, like I said, they were very close friends. They worked together a lot for about 5 years, and Andy and her still see each other and always hugging and smiling right up until she's crying at his funeral. And the music too. I mean, there were a lot of Andy did duets with Olivia later on. Barry did duets with Olivia, and basically Olivia always referred to the Bee Gees and the Andys as my mates, the whole Australian, mate. So, Olivia was a dear friend of the Gibbs, and vice versa.
Exactly right. Yeah, she was a big part of the scene with him, and really fantastic story. And I really appreciate your taking time. Sandra said, yeah, Barry did some duets with Olivia too as well, and there was a lot of Diana Ross involvement with Barry, working on music with Diana Ross as well. And absolutely, everybody thanking you for being here with us as well. Sherry in Kansas, thank you. Book sounds amazing. Can't wait for the Olivia Newton-John book as well. So they're already
coming along. Yeah, it's a harder and longer book to write. I mean, obviously, Olivia lived a lot longer, had a much longer career.
Yeah.
In later part of life, she's involved in so many environmental causes and
incredible, right?
LGBTQ rights, and of course, her cancer research center in Australia, which was she herself thought was her biggest legacy. So with Olivia, it's a more challenging book to write. Let's just put it that way.
Absolutely. Everybody watching, if you enjoyed this episode of the Jim Masters Show Entertainment Lifestyle Celebrity Talk Show series, and this is your first time here, welcome to our series. There are hundreds of episodes that you can binge watch with amazing celebrity friends and special guests from around the world. And also, a couple of people were asking, is this episode going to be archived? Absolutely. If you joined us late or you would like to see it again, it'll be archived on the YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV. So check it out and watch it again and share it and enjoy it. And of course, it does help us when you give a like to our episodes. So click that like button you see there on the YouTube channel. Share this on your social media. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is Jim Masters TV. If you haven't, if you have, thanks so much. Click the notification bell so you never miss any episodes, and drop a comment below. Let us know if you really enjoyed this conversation, what it is about Andy Gibb that you always enjoyed, and the Gibb family, the Bee Gees, the contributions, your favorite songs. Interact with us. We would love that. Matt, this was terrific. I'm so glad you got a chance to hop on the Jim Masters Show series. And as I said earlier, congratulations on the book. I know it was a labor of love for you, and you're very busy with everything that you do there at Georgia Tech and everywhere else. So to be able to find time to pen the biography, you really put the time together to do it and do it in the right way. And congratulations on it, my friend.
Thank you, Jim. And thanks so much for having me on your show. I didn't know about your show myself until you reached out to me. And now I've gone to your YouTube archive and I'm watching all these episodes myself, all these great episodes you have.
I appreciate that. Yeah, you're now part of the Jim Masters show. It's the Levity Squad, as the viewers call it. It's love and levity together. So you're part of the Levity Squad and the Levity family, which is really cool. Spread the word about our show. And we're going to keep the porch light on for you too, my friend. You are welcome back anytime. Feel free to stop by and come see us again. We'll keep that light on for you. Maureen's loving it and enjoyed this conversation. She's in Arizona. Kathleen, these are some of our faithful Levity viewers, Jim Masters Show Levity viewers. Kathleen's in New York City, loves the book idea, and Jane is in Sweden. Same thing, absolutely finding this fascinating.
And you have fans all over the world.
They're all over. Yeah, we love it. And I started this on a fluke, working in television and radio professionally. I started this whole thing as a fluke in the beginning of the pandemic. And it just turned into this big sort of series. And I said, let's keep it going. I told people back in that day, I said, as long as you're out there, we'll keep going. And it's just turned into this big thing. And we appreciate everybody being here and watching and supporting our series. It's unique what we do. Free flowing, conversational, nothing scripted, not like a typical interview. Sandra is in Dallas, and Shyman says, thanks for keeping the legacy alive for these legendary artists. Absolutely. And Sandra says, this is our first time here. Well, I welcome you, and Matt welcomes you here as well. This is Matt's first time here, but not last. Great interview. Thank you. Nikki, thank you as well. And everybody that's watching all around the world. We love having you here. Matt, truly hope you enjoyed the time with me as much as I absolutely have with you, my friend.
It was great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. You take care. In the book, Amazon, and where books are sold, right? Amazon and everywhere.
Yeah, Amazon has everything.
You just go to Amazon and boom, there it is.
Add the cart.
Just put it. Yeah, you've got a couple of people that have it in their cart already, which is cool. That's it. You be well, my friend. Thanks for the generosity of time and sharing Andy Gibb and your book with us tonight. It was a pleasure.
Likewise.
You be well. We'll see you again.
See ya.
All right. Cheers. Wow. What a great conversation, huh? As we took time to celebrate the life of the iconic Andy Gibb. Yeah, we lost him too soon, but Matt was here with his incredible biography. There hasn't been a lot necessarily written in terms of book form about Andy Gibb. Well, we were remembering Andy Gibb, as we like to do with so many here on the Jim Masters Show, Entertainment Lifestyle Celebrity Talk Show series. And Matthew here with us. He's a historian and an award-winning one, and a brilliant author as well. And this was a great walk down memory lane, remembering somebody who left us too soon, but left us with so much incredible music and positive vibes. And there's the book, Arrow Through the Heart, the biography of Andy Gibb, Matthew Hild. And this was really cool. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Certainly interact with us. Let us know. Drop a comment in the comment section below. Subscribe, like, all the rest. Share. Tell your friends about us. We always have a good time here. It's very easy, conversational. It's not heavy and, like interview style. It's much more conversational, and we love having all of you here. And thanks for all these great comments. And if you missed anything, you want to see it again, it's archived on our YouTube channel as well. And Sandra, thank you for joining us as well. Love having you here. And Kathleen as well. And yes, Shy Man, you can watch everything in the archives as well. Really cool having all of you here. And one more time, we thank Matthew for joining us from Georgia, USA. He's with Georgia Tech. And he's a great guy, isn't he? He's very open and authentic and tells the story and shares it. And he's working on that book for Olivia Newton-John, telling her story as well. Very, very cool. Again, wonderful way to remember Andy Gibb here on the Jim Masters Show with all of you, and truly hope you enjoyed it. And Sandra says, in the words of Schwarzenegger, I'll be back. We love to hear that. We love to hear that. You guys are fantastic. Thanks for all these beautiful comments that are in the chat room. These are happening in the chat room as the show is live, but be sure and drop a comment below as well on the channel. We love that. All right, this is your host, Jim Masters, thanking you for your time this time. Till next time, don't go anywhere. There are so many great episodes that are coming up, so many amazing people. You know, this week we have some of your favorites returning. Tina Cole, Tina Cole starred as Katie Douglas on My Three Sons. Stanley Livingston starred as Chip Douglas, My Three Sons. And Herbie J. Pilato, actor and brilliant author, he wrote this book. Now, he's been with us before. We talked about some other great TV shows and memories, but Herbie penned this book, Christmas TV Memories, going over all your Christmas favorites from television, series, specials, and so much more. And Tina and Stanley from My Three Sons are joining us, and that's coming up on Friday. Our next episode, Tristan Mays is going to be here with Jonathan L. Bowen. And Tristan is a fabulous actress. She's been starring on CBS in MacGyver. Jonathan is a phenomenal writer and producer. And together they are paying, I was going to say homage. That might be the right way to say it, because it's comic books, comic book heroes, and so much more. The Comic Shop, it's a new film, and Jesse Metcalf stars in it. Tristan stars in it. She is with us. They are both with us as special guests coming up tomorrow on the show, 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Pacific. Yes, and then coming up this week, we're doing a special on I Love Lucy. And maybe you saw our incredible, iconic, celebrity-filled all-star tribute to Quincy Jones. If you missed that episode, check that out. That's for your perusing and viewing pleasure. So check all that out and enjoy. All right. Once again, Jim Masters here, thanking you for your time this time. Till next time, don't forget to love one another, take care of one another, and don't forget to do the very same for yourself. And come back and see us here. We love having you here on the Jim Masters Show. We love you all. Take care, be well, and cheers.